The sky was not supposed to look like that, not at this hour. It was only 3:17 in the afternoon, and yet the horizon glowed like it had swallowed the sun. Thick columns of smoke twisted upward like dark spires, blotting out the blue sky and turning the world a sickly shade of orange. Ash floated through the air like cursed snow. Jake Rowan gripped the steering wheel of Engine 42 tighter as the radio crackled again. Structure threat confirmed north of Highway 16. I repeat. Mandatory evacuation in Zone 4. Wind shift reported westward. He tuned the volume down. He did not need a reminder. He could already see it. The mountain was burning. The wildfire had jumped containment lines overnight, fueled by gusting winds and bone-dry underbrush. It now tore across the hills above Ransom Ridge, a sleepy town of 1,500 people tucked between the timber-covered foothills and wheat fields of eastern Oregon. Jake's hometown. His fingers twitched slightly against the wheel. No gloves. He liked the way the leather burned against his palm. Something real. Something now. The cabin of the fire truck was stifling, even with the AC blasting. Sweat ran down the back of his neck. "Rowan, you there?" crackled a voice over the radio. Jake snatched the receiver. "Go ahead." "Command says spot fires near Prescott Avenue. Can you hit it before it jumps the road?" Jake glanced at the rearview mirror. 2 volunteers, both young, green and wide-eyed, rode in the back. He did not remember their names. "On it," he said. As he turned onto Prescott Avenue, the fire came into view. Close. Too close. Flames licked up the dry grass near the sidewalk, embers riding the wind like sparks from hell. A single-story house stood barely 100 feet away, its porch already dusted with ash. He pulled the truck up with a screech, jumped out and barked, "Line out! Now!" The 2 volunteers scrambled. The hose dragged across gravel as Jake yanked the nozzle and stomped toward the blaze. He could hear it now, the deep roar of the fire, not unlike a freight train bearing down. It was a sound he knew far too well, and yet it always turned his stomach. He aimed the hose at the dry brush just as the flames crept closer. A blast of water hissed as it met the heat, steam rising like ghosts. For a few moments, Jake focused only on the rhythm. Sweep, hold, shift. The fire responded like a living thing, retreating slightly, then surging forward with angry gusts. A familiar smell hit his nose, scorched pine, melting rubber, the faint stench of something else. Plastic, maybe. Or was it? No. He froze. The smell was different, but it pulled him backward. The smoke curled into the shape of a memory. That warehouse. The scream over the radio. The beam crashing down. The heat closing in. The silence that followed. "Jake!" someone shouted. His eyes snapped open. The wind had shifted. The fire had jumped the makeshift line and now licked at the edge of the neighbor's shed. Jake repositioned, gritting his teeth. Focus. Stay here. Not there. The volunteers ran up with backup lines. One tripped over a rake in the yard and fell hard. Jake cursed under his breath, dropping the nozzle long enough to help the kid up. "You good?" he barked. The boy, no older than 19, nodded, trying not to look embarrassed. Jake turned back to the blaze and unleashed the full force of the hose. The stream arched and battered the flames just as they threatened to overtake the porch. Bits of scorched brush flaked into the air and danced like sparks. And then, he heard it. A faint voice from inside the house. A cry. Jake's stomach clenched. "Did anyone check the house?" The other volunteer shook his head. "We thought it was clear. The neighbors said—" Jake did not wait. He bolted for the front steps, heart thundering in his chest. The screen door was partially open. Inside it was dark, smoke curling along the ceiling. He dropped low, just like he had taught 100 others to do, and called out, "Fire department! Anybody inside?" A muffled sob answered from somewhere beyond the hallway. Jake pressed forward, ducking beneath the thickening smoke. He could see a child, maybe 6 or 7, crouched behind the kitchen table, clinging to a stuffed bear. "Hey, kid," Jake said gently, crouching low. "We are going to get out of here, okay?" The child did not move. "I need you to crawl to me." More sobbing. Jake crawled forward on his belly, pulled the child close, and wrapped him in his turnout coat. He turned back and saw the fire creeping into the living room. It was moving fast. Too fast. The hallway behind them was now a corridor of flame. Jake turned toward the back door. It was their only shot. He sprinted through the kitchen, shoulder first, and slammed into the exit with everything he had. It gave way. Cool air hit him like a wave. He stumbled outside, clutching the child, and fell to his knees on the damp grass. Sirens echoed in the distance. The sound of more engines, more help. But it barely registered. Jake looked down at the boy, coughing, but alive. He exhaled. For a moment he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Relief. Then came the sound that froze the blood in his veins. An explosion. A second house igniting across the street. But that was not what shook him. It was the address. 266 Pine Street. His mother's house. Jake's head whipped toward the smoke, eyes wide. "No," he whispered. The chapter ends with Jake running, toward the fire he thought he would never face again. Jake ran. His boots slammed against the pavement, the hose line and sirens fading behind him. His breath came in ragged bursts, lungs already burned from the smoke inside the last house. The wind howled down the street, tossing ash into his face as if trying to blind him. But he could see it clearly now. Pine Street. The roof of his mother's house was glowing, not yet in flames, but close. The sky above it churned with black smoke, twisting like something alive. Jake sprinted across the lawn, his heart hammering like a warning drum in his chest. He vaulted the porch steps 2 at a time and slammed his fist against the door. "Mom!" No answer. He reached for the doorknob. Unlocked. He pushed it open and was met with a wave of heat. The fire had not reached the interior yet, but the temperature inside was rising fast. He stepped into the entryway and paused. The house was frozen in time. Same carpet, same framed photos on the wall, same scent of old furniture and lavender, somehow still present beneath the smell of smoke. His chest tightened. "Mom, are you here?" He moved deeper inside. The kitchen was empty. The lights flickered overhead. He turned down the hallway, passing the closed door to his old bedroom. "Jake?" The voice stopped him cold. He turned. His mother stood at the far end of the hallway, her silver hair slightly mussed, one hand braced against the wall. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but confusion. "What are you doing here?" she asked, almost accusingly. Jake swallowed. "There's a fire. You need to leave." "I can see that," she said. Her voice was clipped, calm. "But I'm not leaving until I find the box." "What box?" She turned and stepped into her bedroom. Jake followed. "Mom, we do not have time." She dropped to her knees beside her dresser and pulled open a bottom drawer. "It has your father's medals, and some letters, things that matter. I am not letting them burn." Jake stared at her, torn between urgency and disbelief. "Grab what you need and let's go. Now." She pulled out the box, a small wooden chest, dusty and worn, and hugged it close like it was sacred. Then she stood, looked at him, and for the first time in years, her eyes softened. "You came back," she said, almost to herself. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but a crash from outside cut him off. The front window shattered inward from the heat. The wind screamed through the opening, and with it came flame. He grabbed her arm. "Move!" They ran down the hallway as the living room caught fire behind them. Jake kicked open the back door and pushed her through first, shielding her from falling embers. Once outside, she stumbled into the yard, clutching the box. Jake looked back. The flames were eating the curtains, crawling up the ceiling. And yet, even then, he felt the pull, that old, gnawing guilt, whispering, "You are too late." Again. He turned away. Outside, 2 fire engines rolled up the street, water cannons already spraying down nearby rooftops. One of the volunteers from earlier, the young one who had tripped, ran toward them. "You all right?" he asked. Jake nodded. "She's clear. Command wants you at staging. They're setting up a new line near Mill Creek. Wind's turning everything south." Jake looked down the street. Houses already smoldering, neighbors running with pets and bags of clothes. The wind had changed again. He could feel it in his bones. "We have no chance of stopping it in town," he muttered. The kid nodded grimly. "They say we have 12 hours, maybe less." Jake turned to his mother, who was sitting in the grass, cradling the box like it was all she had left. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, but she said nothing. There had been so many years of silence between them. Too many. He crouched beside her. "You should go to the shelter. It's at the high school." She shook her head. "I will stay at the church. The basement is stone." "It will hold. You cannot stay. You lost your right to tell me what I can or cannot do," she snapped, suddenly sharp again. "Not after you disappeared." Jake stood slowly, his jaw tight. "I came back. You should have come back when your father died." The silence between them was louder than the fire. He turned without answering and walked toward the truck. As he climbed into the cab, another voice came through the radio. "Rowan, we have a situation at the fire break near Dry Pine Trail. Some kids went off-road, got caught in the canyon, trapped. Deputies on the way, but you are closest." Jake grabbed the receiver. "How many?" 3. Teens. Some kind of off-roading stunt. Smoke's already bad." Jake paused. The canyon was a dead zone. No hydrants, limited access, and thick brush on all sides. It was the same place he and his brother used to ride dirt bikes, back when fire season was just a background thought. "I'm heading there now," he said. He hit the lights and peeled out. As the truck sped through the orange-hazed streets, Jake's mind drifted. Not to the kids, to his brother, to the accident, to the secret buried deep beneath all of this, one he had spent years trying to forget. The road to Dry Pine curved sharply, then narrowed. Smoke clouded the path. Jake hit the brakes as he spotted a dirt bike, half submerged in a ditch, flames licking the surrounding brush. There was screaming in the distance. He grabbed his gear, jumped out, and ran. He did not see the shadow watching from the ridgeline. He did not see the spark, deliberate, methodical, that lit another patch of dry grass near the canyon trail. This was no accident. This fire was not just nature's wrath. It was personal. The smoke in Dry Pine Canyon was thicker than anything Jake had seen that season. It clung to the trees like fog, choking the sunlight until everything was gray and flickering. The ridgeline twisted above him like the spine of some ancient creature, and somewhere down the trail, voices were still screaming. Jake sprinted, his pack thudding against his back, fire axe in one hand, radio in the other. "Dispatch, this is Rowan," he said through his mask. "On foot. One bike located. Still searching for the teens." The only response was static. The radio was dead this deep in. He pushed forward. Dry Pine Trail narrowed into an old logging path, half swallowed by brush and erosion. Every few feet, embers flared along the undergrowth. Jake stomped them as he passed, but it was a losing battle. Then he heard it again. A voice, ragged and close. "Help!" Jake spun toward the sound and spotted movement through the smoke. A teenage boy, no older than 16, limped out from behind a rock. Blood streaked his forehead, and his shirt was singed. Jake ran to him. How many with you? 2 more, the boy gasped. Back that way. The fire, it's circling us. Jake helped him sit against a rock. Stay here. Do not move. He moved down the slope quickly, navigating fallen limbs and loose dirt. The heat pressed in, suffocating. But then, through the smoke, he saw them. A girl and another boy, both crouched near a creek bed, trapped between 2 growing patches of flame. Jake waved. This way! Come toward my voice! We can't, the girl shouted. The fire's on both sides. He scanned the terrain. They were boxed in, but there was a narrow cut to the left, a dry ravine that sloped back toward the trail. He pulled his fire blanket from the pack and ran straight into the brush. Branches scraped at his helmet. Thorns tore his sleeves, but he made it to them. I'm going to cover us with this, he said, spreading the blanket wide. Stay low, stay close. We move together. They nodded, eyes wide with terror. They crawled, pressed to the dirt, as Jake held the blanket over them like a shield. Heat singed his arms. Smoke clawed down his throat. He could hear it, the roar of the flames, the snapping of trees, the hiss of oxygen being devoured. But they made it. Back at the top of the trail, Jake brought them to the injured teen. They clung to one another, coughing and crying. Jake collapsed to one knee, exhausted. And that was when he saw it. A spark, small but deliberate, drifting down from the slope above them. He looked up. At first he thought it was wind-blown ember. But then he saw the glint, the unmistakable flick of a lighter in a hand just before it vanished into the brush. Someone had been up there. Someone had started this. Jake's breath caught in his chest. Stay here, he barked to the teens. He scrambled up the incline, dodging burning limbs. At the top, the ridge flattened into a clearing, but it was empty. The figure was gone. What remained was worse. A fire starter's kit, a butane torch, oily rags, and a half-melted canister of accelerant. All tucked into a scorched backpack. Jake's blood went cold. This was not just reckless. It was planned. He picked up the pack. A tag inside read, Property of RR High School, Gear Number 32, a school kit, field trip gear. He turned as the wind shifted again, hard and sudden. The fire below surged. Jake raced back to the teens, but the fire was faster. Trees crackled like bones, snapping in rapid succession. A falling branch clipped Jake's shoulder, sending him tumbling. When he opened his eyes, he was at the bottom of the slope again, disoriented. Mr. Rowan, the girl shouted. Jake pushed himself up. His shoulder throbbed. He grabbed the teens and led them toward the dirt road he had come from. As they reached a break in the tree line, a sheriff's SUV skidded to a stop ahead. Deputy Carla James stepped out, early 30s, steady hands, eyes like steel. She waved them toward the vehicle. Load them in. Jake helped the kids into the SUV. Carla slammed the door and turned to Jake. You look like hell. Jake grunted. Feels about right. What the hell were they doing out here? He held up the pack. Someone planted accelerants. Carla's eyes narrowed. Are you saying this fire was set? Jake nodded. This part of it? Definitely. And whoever did it is still nearby. Carla's jaw tightened. That changes everything. I will call it in. Jake looked back toward the canyon. Any chance we can trace this? She motioned to the patch on the bag. Ransom Ridge High School. I will get the principal involved. Could be one of their own. Jake's eyes darkened. Or worse, someone using the school gear as cover. As the SUV drove off with the kids, Jake stood in the fading light, staring at the ridgeline. And then, as if summoned by memory, the canyon spoke again. Not with flames, but with echoes. A different fire. A younger scream. A crash. He could still feel the heat, the helplessness. His brother, Micah. It had happened here, 5 years ago to the day. The night Jake had ignored every warning and let Micah ride alone, even after the first sparks of fire season had begun. Micah never made it back. The coroner ruled it an accident, a crash and heat stroke. But Jake had always blamed himself, and now this same place was burning again. Jake crouched, breathing shallowly, staring at the charred soil beneath his boots. The past was not just haunting him, it was repeating itself, deliberately. Jake stood in the middle of the burned clearing long after the sheriff's SUV disappeared down the trail. The smell of scorched pine and melting plastic lingered like a ghost. His hands trembled, from adrenaline maybe, or memory. The fire here had been controlled, intentional. The same canyon, the same month, 5 years apart. Jake pressed his hand to a charred tree, the bark flaking away like brittle paper. The same tree Micah had crashed into. The coroner's report had said the bike veered off course, but Jake had always wondered. Had he missed something? Had the fire 5 years ago been more than just an accident? He shoved the thought aside and made his way back to the truck. When he returned to town, dusk was bleeding into the edges of the sky, turning the clouds dark red. The fire had slowed slightly, but every resident in Ransom Ridge knew it was far from over. Smoke hung low over the rooftops. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jake parked outside the volunteer fire station, a small, worn brick building that had served the town since his father's day. Inside, Carla was waiting. She sat at a metal table in the briefing room, a laptop open, a printout in her hands. "Got something," she said, not looking up. Jake dropped the scorched backpack on the table. "So do I." She nodded toward the paper. "Ransom Ridge High School. The gear you found was from their wilderness program. Check the roster. Gear number 32 was signed out to a senior named Tyler Kerrigan. Local kid, 4.0 student, works at the hardware store, no priors, no record of causing trouble." Jake frowned. Why would a straight-arrow kid be carrying accelerants into a wildfire zone? Carla shrugged. "That's what I intend to find out." She leaned back, studying him. "You sure you're all right? You do not look like a guy who just saved 3 kids." Jake sat across from her and ran a hand through his soot-streaked hair. "Because it is not over. Whoever started that fire is still out there." Carla opened a drawer and pulled out an old manila folder. She slid it across the table. "You know what this is?" she asked. Jake flipped it open. His breath caught. Micah Rowan. Incident report, July 23rd, 5 years ago. Cause of death, accidental. Jake blinked. "Why do you have this?" Carla's voice was low. "Because back then, I was just a deputy. And I thought something about that crash felt off. I pushed for a deeper investigation, but your mother shut it down, said she did not want Micah's name dragged through more grief." Jake stared at the report. "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think someone wanted it buried." A long silence stretched between them. Jake clenched his fists. "I should have stayed, after it happened. Instead, I ran. Took wildfire contracts out west. Anywhere but here. You were grieving. I was hiding." Carla studied him. "You are not hiding now." Before he could reply, the radio buzzed again. A voice crackled through. "Command to all units. Spot fire reported near municipal substation. Coordinates sent. Possible signs of forced entry. Confirmed flare activity." Jake and Carla locked eyes. "Substation?" he asked. "That's power grid," she finished. "If that goes down, we lose all control." They bolted from the station. The substation sat on the edge of town, where the tree line met the perimeter road. It was surrounded by chain-link fence and guarded by little more than a padlock. As they arrived, flames licked along the fence line, casting eerie shadows across the control boxes. Jake climbed out of the truck. See the padlock? Carla approached, flashlight in hand. Cut clean. She pulled it off and stepped inside. They circled the control station, scanning for more damage. Jake spotted something wedged behind a transformer, a charred notebook. He pulled it free carefully. Inside were sketches, diagrams, maps of the town's electrical lines, and notes, dozens of them. Jake flipped through. Grid failure equals chaos. People move when afraid. Fire clears what law cannot. Carla leaned in. Who the hell writes that? Jake turned another page and froze. A drawing of Pine Street, circled, marked. A red X on 216. His mother's house. Jake's mouth went dry. This isn't random. Someone's targeting specific properties. Why hers? Carla asked. What does she have that anyone would want? Jake opened his mouth, then stopped. Back when his father passed, the city had offered to buy the land. Something about zoning. She refused. Twice. Real estate, he muttered. They want people gone. Fire makes them leave. And the ones who don't, burn out. Carla's face hardened. This is criminal. Arson for development. Maybe worse. Sirens howled again nearby. Someone was responding, but it felt like everything had already shifted. Jake stared into the burning trees. This was not about a wildfire anymore. It was about control, power, erasure, and whoever was behind it. They had planned it for years. Jake turned to Carla. We need names. Landowners who refuse to sell. People on zoning boards. Anyone who benefits if this town disappears. I'll get them, she said, already reaching for her phone. Jake glanced again at the notebook in his hand, at the sketch of his mother's house. Then he turned to Carla. There's one more thing. What? My brother. Carla looked up, puzzled. Jake's voice was hoarse. I think they started back then, 5 years ago. I think Micah's death wasn't an accident. She said nothing, because deep down, she already knew. And from somewhere beyond the flames, the fire roared again, not angry, but hungry. The town of Ransom Ridge was unraveling. By dawn, the fire had breached the northern line. Smoke coated everything like a second skin. Ash clung to the rooftops. The local school gymnasium was packed with evacuees, families clutching blankets, pets in crates, children crying from fear and smoke inhalation. Jake stood near the bleachers, watching as medical volunteers handed out masks and water bottles. The notebook Carla had recovered from the substation was tucked beneath his arm. He had not slept. He could not. The sketch of his mother's house haunted him. The markings. The intent behind them. It was no longer just a fire. It was a cleansing of land, of resistance, of memory. He spotted Carla at the far end of the gym, speaking with the town planner, a man named Douglas Meeks, bald, nervous, holding a clipboard like a shield. Jake walked over just in time to hear Carla's voice rise. You signed off on zoning expansions outside Ridge Valley. That land was marked as wildfire-prone. Meeks stammered. That assessment was 20 years old, and I was told the fire threat was minimal. By whom? Carla pressed. Meeks looked over at Jake, then lowered his voice. You need to speak to Nate Brenner. Jake blinked. Nate? He's head of the Chamber of Commerce. And part of the Emergency Resource Committee, Meeks added. His company owns the development rights for 3 of the zones being burned. Jake felt the breath leave his lungs. Nate Brenner had been one of his father's closest friends, a frequent guest at Sunday dinners, a presence at Micah's funeral. Jake had not seen him since he left town. He spoke at Micah's memorial, Jake muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Carla's eyes narrowed. We need to talk to him. Jake nodded. I know where he'll be. Brenner's real estate office sat on Main Street, a two-story brick building with glass windows and expensive wood trim. Even in a town on fire, it looked untouched. Jake and Carla walked in without knocking. The reception desk was empty, the hallway quiet. Jake knew the layout. He had delivered files here as a teenager, back when Nate used to give him gum and talk about legacy. They found him in the conference room, speaking quietly into a satellite phone. When he saw Jake and Carla enter, he smiled, or tried to. "Jake Rowan," he said. "Heard you were back in town." Jake stepped closer. "Cut the small talk. We know about the zoning deals, the substation, the arson." Brenner raised a hand. "Slow down. You have no idea what you're saying." Carla pulled out the notebook. "Do you recognize this?" His expression faltered for the briefest second. "No," he said. Jake stared him down. "Why was my mother's house marked?" Brenner looked between them, then let out a slow breath. "You think this is all some conspiracy? That I lit the match myself?" "I think people are dying," Carla snapped, "and your name is on the contracts." Brenner stepped closer. "Look, I didn't start the fires, but yes, I knew this was coming." Jake's fists clenched. "Explain." Brenner sighed. 2 years ago, we got a proposal from a firm based out of Denver. They were looking to build a mountain retreat, luxury cabins, eco-resorts, the whole deal. They offered to buy parcels across Ridge Valley, but your mother and others refused. They held up development. "So you burned them out?" Carla asked. Brenner raised his hands. "I didn't, but I believe someone working with that firm took matters into their own hands. A private contractor. Off the books." Jake's voice was ice. "What was his name?" "I don't know, but—" He hesitated. "I think he was involved back then, when Micah died." Jake felt the floor tilt. "What?" "I never told your mother this, but 2 nights before the crash, I saw a stranger scouting the trails. Looked military, sharp, out of place. I reported it to the sheriff's office. They said they'd handle it." Carla frowned. "We never had a record of that report." Brenner nodded. "Exactly." Jake stepped back. His ears were ringing. Micah had not just died in a fire. He had been watched. Back at the station, Jake sat on the front steps, staring into the smoke-thick horizon. The town was almost fully evacuated. Carla was pulling old records. A few volunteer units were still active, but the fire was moving faster than they could stop it. Jake reached into his coat and pulled out a photo, one he had carried for years. Him and Micah. 2 kids on bikes, standing in front of the canyon. Micah had been the wild one, daring, brave to a fault. Jake had always played it safe. That was the joke between them. Jake, the rule book, Micah, the spark. And now he understood. Micah's spark had lit more than adventure. It had lit fear, resistance, and someone had decided to extinguish it. Jake closed his eyes. He could hear his brother laughing, taunting him to ride faster. He opened his eyes and saw a figure standing in the smoke. It was the young volunteer, the one who had tripped during the hose deployment. He held something out, a cell phone, face pale. I think I found something," the boy stammered. "I was going through old local forums, and there's a name that keeps popping up." Jake took the phone. A profile. Anonymous. Username, Ashfall32. Posts about land clearance, fire models, evacuation maps, all dated months in advance. Then he saw a message thread. Ashfall32. Once it begins, there's no stopping it. Let the town burn. Let the weak run. Fire clears what fear cannot. And the IP address? Traced to a server owned by Brenner Development Group. But the last login? 1 hour ago. They were still here, still watching, still lighting matches. Jake stared at the screen on the young volunteer's phone, his fingers curling around the edge of the device. Ashfall 32. He had no doubt now. This was not just about fire. It was about destruction calculated by someone who knew the town, who had studied its evacuation patterns, its weaknesses. Someone inside. Carla walked up beside him, scanning the messages with narrowed eyes. "I'll get our tech team on this. If we can triangulate the location of the last login—" "We don't have time," Jake interrupted. He looked out across the horizon. The fire line was now visible from the station, a wall of flickering orange light moving steadily downhill. The wind had shifted again, now pushing directly toward the town center, toward the church. Jake's mother was still there. He turned sharply. "I'm going." Carla grabbed his arm. "Jake, wait. She won't leave unless I'm the one telling her. And if this is what I think it is, they're not just burning buildings anymore. They're burning names off the map." Carla nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay on the hunt. You get her out." Jake rushed to the truck. The church sat at the edge of Old Town, built of stone and timber, stubborn and proud. It had survived floods, storms, even a small earthquake in the 70s. Now it stood defiant again, as flames danced in the trees behind it. Jake pulled up fast, nearly clipping the sidewalk. He jumped out, ran up the steps, and pushed through the heavy front doors. Inside, it was dim. Candles flickered in wall sconces. Wooden pews stood like silent sentinels. And there, sitting alone in the front row, was his mother, her back straight, the box of medals beside her. She did not turn when he entered. "Mom," Jake called. She turned slowly, eyes calm. "I figured you'd come. You need to leave. Now." She looked past him toward the stained glass window. Outside, smoke was thickening, dimming the sunlight into a pale red glow. "I was hoping this building would outlast me. But maybe nothing's meant to last forever." Jake walked to her, knelt down. "I know about the zoning. About Micah." Her expression flickered. "I should have stayed," Jake continued, voice tight. "After he died. I left you to face everything alone." She met his eyes. "I asked you to leave." "You were breaking. I was running." A silence hung between them. Then, softly, she said, "He always followed you, you know. Micah. Even when you didn't notice. That's why he was out there that day. He wanted to ride like you." Jake's throat tightened. "I think they used him," he whispered. "To scare you. To open the land. And now they're finishing the job." She nodded once, slowly. "Then we don't let them win." He stood and helped her up. Together they walked out the front doors, just as a gust of wind sent a wave of embers across the church roof. Jake turned back only once, watching the old shingles catch fire, knowing they would not survive the hour. But she had. And that was enough. Back at the fire station, Carla was waiting with a laptop open and the young volunteer by her side. Jake pulled up, helped his mother inside, then joined them in the briefing room. "We got a signal," Carla said. "The user logged in again 10 minutes ago. Public Wi-Fi." "Guess where?" Jake leaned over the table. Carla tapped the map. "The high school." Jake stared. "Everyone's supposed to be out." "Not everyone," Carla said. "I pulled school records. Security footage from yesterday shows a custodian entering after hours. Name's listed as David Kent." Jake frowned. "That name's not familiar." "It wouldn't be," she said, "because he only appeared on payroll 6 months ago. Before that, nothing. No prior address, no background." Jake's pulse quickened. Fake identity? Or a cover? For someone who wanted to move around unnoticed, set fires, study the town. Jake clenched his jaw. I'll go. Carla grabbed her keys. We go together. The high school stood in eerie silence. The parking lot was empty, save for one truck. Old, tan, covered in dust. Jake eyed the license plate. Out of state. They moved through the gym entrance, flashlights sweeping the empty halls. The fire's glow pressed faintly through the windows now, flickering like distant lightning. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like insects. Then they heard it, the sound of movement near the science wing. Jake motioned to Carla. They crept down the corridor, boots silent on tile. At the end of the hall, a figure emerged, tall, lean, wearing a gray hoodie. Jake raised his voice. Freeze! The figure turned. Jake's breath caught. He knew that face. Older, hardened, but familiar. Tommy Lane, he whispered. Carla stared. Who? Jake's voice cracked. He was Micah's friend. Used to ride with us. Vanished the year after Micah died. Tommy's eyes gleamed in the dark. Didn't expect you to remember me, Jake. Jake stepped forward. You started this? Tommy chuckled. I was recruited. They needed someone who knew the land, knew how to move without being seen, and I needed purpose. You killed Micah, Jake growled. Tommy's face darkened. No, that was an accident. But after that, I saw how weak this town was, how easy it was to bend it, to burn it. You let him die. Tommy's expression twisted. You left him first. The words struck like a fist. Carla raised her weapon. Hands where I can see them. Tommy slowly reached behind him. Too slowly. Jake shouted, Gun! Too late. Tommy drew something, not a firearm but a flare gun. He fired. The flare hit a gas can at the end of the hall. The explosion rocked the corridor, knocking all three to the floor. Glass shattered. Heat surged in. Jake grabbed Carla and pulled her into the classroom just as flames tore through the hallway. Smoke filled the air. Sirens wailed in the distance. Outside, the school was burning, and Tommy Lane was gone. The school burned behind them like a second sun. Jake stumbled through the shattered exit doors, dragging Carla with him. Smoke poured from the roof as fire alarms blared, the last cries of a dying building. Sirens screamed in the distance, but the fire was already inside. Too fast, too hungry. He coughed violently, scanning the road. Tommy Lane was gone. But not far. Jake could feel it. Not just in his gut, in his bones. The way a storm knows the sea. Tommy had spent years hiding in Jake's blind spot, and now he was slipping through one last crack. Carla leaned on him, grimacing. Her arm was singed, blood soaking her sleeve. I'm good, she said, before he even asked. Go. Jake nodded and took off, his boots slapping the pavement. He followed the fire. Main Street was nearly empty, the town completely evacuated now. Flames licked up the edges of buildings like fingers peeling wallpaper. Storefronts crackled, windows burst outward from heat. And ahead, at the old water tower, stood Tommy, waiting. Jake slowed as he approached, chest heaving. This where it ends? Tommy turned, hands loose at his sides. Maybe. Depends on what you came for. Jake stepped closer. Justice. Tommy tilted his head. Is that what you call it? After all the lies they built this town on? You killed people. I cleared the way, Tommy snapped, for something better. This place never gave us anything. It took your brother. It forgot me. I just made sure it didn't keep taking. Jake stared at him. You were his friend. I was, Tommy said, and for a moment he looked human again. Micah wanted to fight, not with guns, with truth. He found out they were going to use that fire years ago. Burn through properties. Your mom was on the list. He told me, said we had to stop it, but he went alone that day, and I let him. Jake stepped forward, the heat rising around them. You didn't light the match, he said, but you watched him burn. Tommy looked away. Jake pulled something from his pocket, the photo of him and Micah. I've carried this for 5 years, trying to figure out where I failed. Tommy blinked, eyes flicking toward it. Jake's voice shook. But I see now. We all failed him. You, me, this town. But that doesn't give you the right to burn it down. Sirens wailed again, closer this time. Fire trucks turning down the street. Back up. Tommy looked at the photo one last time, then dropped to his knees. He did not speak. He did not resist. Jake stood over him as the ash swirled in the air, and for the first time in 5 years, the wind was quiet. 2 days later, the fires were declared contained. Over 70% of Ransom Ridge had been scorched, but the town stood, barely. The church's stone walls had held. The high school was gone. So were 6 homes, but no one else died. No more names were lost to the fire. Tommy Lane was arrested and charged with multiple counts of arson, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. He confessed in full. The Denver firm behind the land deals, exposed. Their developers fled the state under legal scrutiny. But Jake did not care about courtrooms. He cared about clearing the name that had burned with Micah. In the center of town, beside the melted flagpole, Jake placed a new plaque, one that read, "In memory of Micah Rowan, a voice that tried to save us all." Carla stood beside him, her arm in a sling. You think the town will come back? Jake looked around at the blackened trees, the shell of the school, the ash-covered ground. Yes, he said, because fire doesn't just destroy. It clears. It reveals. She raised an eyebrow. Reveals what? He looked out toward the hills. Who we are underneath it all. That night, Jake returned to the firehouse, still standing, still his. He unpacked his old gear, scrubbed the soot from his helmet, and placed it on the hook by the door. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Micah's handwriting. He had never opened it. It had arrived a week before the crash. Jake had ignored it, thinking it was just another note, another apology. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Jake, I know you think I'm reckless. Maybe I am, but I've seen something brewing in this town. They're not who they pretend to be. I'm going to find out the truth. If I don't come back, promise me one thing. Do not let them bury what matters. Not me, not this town, not us. M. Jake folded the letter and slid it into his coat. Outside, the smoke had cleared. Stars glittered faintly overhead. And in the silence that followed the fire, something stirred. Not fear, not grief, but resolve. Jake Rowan had returned. Not to escape the past, but to build something from it, to carry what mattered, and never let it burn again.